Madam State Regent. As we all know, there are many stories of women who became famous because they were heroes and patriots of the Revolutionary War. But there are also many, many stories of unknown women who also helped to chart the course as we won our independence and founded a new nation. So many of their stories on and off the battlefield were never recorded or were lost over the years. The Daughters of the American Revolution has been very active in researching and documenting these stories. Their Patriot Index is very expanding to include more women designated as patriots. I'm going to give you a little background for the story of the bravery and deeds of a Connecticut woman and her family. Mr. Thomas J. King of Arkansas, formerly of Madison, Connecticut, is a descendant of Phoebe Landfair. Dame Landfair's original journals no longer exist, but fortunately, her daughter Katie, who was the little girl in the story, recorded this account of an event in September 1781. It was passed down in the family for generations, and Mr. King was the caretaker of this manuscript for 70 years. He felt that it was time for it to return to Connecticut. He donated his family's precious manuscript to CTDAR because his mother-in-law was a member of the DAR. The setting of this story is a little rocky promontory that was called Scotch Cap because of its shape. It is now the Land Cove area of Branford. The Landfair home stood on the highest point. It was a large frame, two-story house of unpainted and well-seasoned wood. From the back door, one could look out miles over Long Island Sound. To the east, one could watch for sails coming around Guilford Point. The nearest neighbor was 6 or 7 miles away. Dame Landfair was described as robust, though slender and energetic. At the time, most of the men were out to sea unless too old to go. Her husband, Captain Landfair, was away on board his ship, the Chloe Ann. Phoebe, like many other women, were left at home to care for their 4 children and prepare food for the winter. Many women had to endure the loss of their homes and property during the war, as in the case of Esther St. John and Elizabeth Sally, whose Connecticut farms both sustained extensive damage in a British raid. Although there is no official count, it is estimated that thousands of structures burned or were destroyed in the eastern United States between 1775 and 1783. Danbury and Fairfield were burned in 1777. Dame Landfair felt that it was her obligation to keep their home and possessions safe in her husband's absence. The Battle of Fort Griswold and the burning of Groton in New London occurred on September 6, 1781. The following is the story based on entries from her journal of how this very brave Connecticut woman stood up to the British and literally saved the bacon. Her story also occurred on and around September 6, 1781. It is a small story in comparison to the big events of the war, but our country's history is also told by thousands of small stories. But I will let Dame Landfair relate the events of those September days 240 years ago. Wait, I think you see her with her grandchildren in tow coming up the path now.
Well, I think a nice story would be just the thing after that pleasant walk around the cove. I know you children just love to hear stories about your parents when they were your age. Let me consult my journal here. Oh, I think I have just the story for you. Here we are. September 1781, during the War of Independence. I remember it as though it were yesterday. And you know, if this story had had a different ending, we would not be sitting here in the Landfair house. Our country had been at war for 5 long, hard years. Strong British forces were attacking, raiding, and burning along the coast. We had to be ever vigilant. There were spies among us, and the threat of danger was ever present. The first week of September brought word of the burning of many area homes and shops. With your grandfather and so many of our men away, their families were advised to flee their homes and take shelter elsewhere because of the danger. Many women took their children and did just that. But after much consideration, I decided that I simply could not abide the thought of abandoning our home and everything we owned to such a fate. It riled me to think of the British seizing our food stores and possessions to advance their cause. Now, I admit I can be a bit stubborn. Once I made the decision to stay the course, I called George, Horace, Oliver, and my little Katie together and told them that we had a very important job to do for our family and for our country, that we would have to work together harder than we'd ever worked, and that Father would be proud of us for our efforts. First off, I set little Katie in a chair in the doorway so she could see the cove. She was to watch for a man that they called Uncle Jake, but behind his back, everybody called him Tory Jake, always sneaking about, hoping to get information that he could give to the redcoats for reward or favor. He'd come by asking to borrow our clam hoe, just to spy on us. None of the settlers trusted that crafty little fellow. Little Katie was to call out a warning if she sighted him. It would not do for him to see what we were up to. Then the boys and I set to work. For want of a barn, our grains were stored in the garret, all our winter supply. Oliver and I worked quickly to load all the oats into sacks that we carried downstairs and across the clearing to an old well site. Oliver worked hard and without complaint to fill the well shaft with sacks. We put little George and Horace to the task of gathering stones to cover the opening so it would just appear to be a pile of stones. Next came the problem of concealing the rye. Well, after rejecting a number of possibilities, we settled on a good plan. We took the straw out of all our mattresses and placed the sacks of rye inside them, then stuffed a little straw on top to make them appear soft. Just as the task was completed, Katie sounded the alarm, letting us know that Tory Jake was approaching. We went out to meet him. Without listening to his usual prattle and gossip, we quickly accepted the clam hoe back and sent him on his way, relieved to be rid of the sneaky little pest. After a quick lunch of clams and eggs, we resumed our labors. We decided to hide my butter jars under the ash heap in the corner of the cellar. Oliver suggested that we put my silver spoons, my brooch, Father's silver tankard, our money, as well as important papers under the ash heap along with the butter. Oliver always had a good head on his shoulders. We placed a piece of sheet lead over everything before covering the lot over with ashes. Even if the house burned, these items might be spared. When our barn had burned down last spring, Father built a shed down in the little meadow a good ways from the house, out of sight. All the hay was stored there, and that's where we hid the cows and the sheep. Just as we were preparing for our evening tasks, a rider came galloping up with very distressing news. He reported that the enemy had captured Fort Griswold despite a heroic resistance. The garrison had been massacred. He told me that the selectmen of the township had sent him to me in particular because the black-hearted trader Benedict Arnold knew the coast well and would probably send ships here because of the fresh spring water they could use to fill their water casks. He pointed out that as the wife of Captain Landfair, I could be in real danger. The selectmen advised me and the children to take shelter in his home. Well, I thanked him for his invitation, but I knew in my heart that if the British came and found our home deserted, they would surely burn it and destroy what they couldn't carry off. I told him that if my husband should desert his ship at sea without striking a blow, he'd be a traitor to his country. And if I deserted the home he confided to my charge without an effort to protect it, I'd not be much better. I am his deputy and must do what he would do. Well, after a bit of muttering and referring to me as a willful woman, he grudgingly admitted that I might be right, and he rode off to warn others. As I watched him ride away, I will admit that my heart sank at the thought of being left totally alone with 4 children here in Scotch Cap, isolated with the nearest neighbor 7 miles away. I remember so clearly, Oliver came over to me and said, "Mother, I'm glad we're going to stick it out." It was at that moment that I felt my resolve return stronger than ever. We would stick it out. Although we were all bone-tired, there would be no rest for us that night. The most arduous task lay ahead of us, and I truly doubted that we would have the strength to do it. The butchering of large animals had always been the work of strong men. Keeping the fire going, 2 enormous iron pots, a huge scalding tub, a gallows made of cedar poles, and 5 heavy hogs with 1 woman and 3 boys to hoist them, kill, scald, and dress them. Disagreeable and dirty work it was. We were filthy and exhausted when we were done, but I was so proud of my boys. We quickly buried all traces of our labors, and then after 24 hours of hard work, we faced the task of dividing, packing, and hiding the pork. George and Horace did a number of smaller tasks, and they took care of Katie. Oliver and I soaked the sections of pork in brine and wrapped them in cloth. But we still faced the problem of where to hide the pork. We came up with a brilliant plan. The chimney was large, 12 feet square. Using a plank resting on some projections in the masonry inside the chimney, we were able to rig up, a kind of scaffolding with a table, some chairs, and a ladder. Oliver climbed the ladder and drove the spikes into the sides of the chimney near the top. The plan was that as soon as ships were spotted in the cove, Oliver and I would work quickly to take the pork out of the brine and stow it high up in the chimney. Then we would remove the scaffolding and build a fire on the hearth with a pot of lye and grease for soap making in order to conceal the smell of the brine. Well, the danger arrived on the third day after we completed our preparations. That morning, George spotted 3 sails rounding the point. One of the ships landed. We stood together in front of our home, Oliver on one side of me, Katie clinging to my skirt. We were afraid, but we didn't speak of it. We did have a bit of luck, though, because the British captain proved to be a kinder man than most in his position. Oh, he did not prevent his men from searching the house top to bottom and carrying off whatever they found useful to the king's service, but nor did he permit useless destruction and violence. Our unwelcome visitors did not find our hidden goods. As they prepared to leave, the captain approached me where I stood with my children and said, "Well, if the house had been deserted, I suppose I couldn't have kept my men from pillaging and burning it. But as you have had the pluck to stay here, you shan't be troubled." And off they went. As you may imagine, we rejoiced at our good fortune. But I believed it was more than luck that saved our home. It was keeping our wits about us, pulling together, working hard, and sticking it out that saved the day. As we watched the British sail away, little Horace piped up, "Won't Father laugh when he hears what a time we had to save our bacon?" Well, children, that is the story of why the Landfair home still stands on this spot. I hope someday you will tell this story to your grandchildren. It's a little part of our country's history and how families like ours helped to chart our course as a free nation. Well, children, I would now like to hear you recite. I know you've been working diligently on your lessons, and education is so important. So would you take your masks off and put them? And Adeline, Ellie, Evie, Thorne, and Robbie, please stand and recite the Revolutionary War alphabet. I'll hold it for you.
A stands for the army of our colonists, ready to fight. B stands for the bravery it took to stand for what they believed was right. C stands for the colonies, united to break free from all British ties. D stands for the declaration that set a lofty goal for us to realize. E stands for the endurance of our troops against a mighty force. F stands for the fortitude it took them to keep their noble course.
G stands for grateful, how we feel about our homes in this beautiful free land. H stands for heroes, who against all of our enemies will always stand. I stands for independence, that by the blood of our patriots was won. J stands for justice, we achieved when the battle was done. K stands for King George, who thought our demands he could ignore. L stands for liberty, we achieved by the Revolutionary War.
M stands for our militia and their captains who led the way. N stands for the notion that we were entitled to a government where we all have a say. O stands for the opposite loyalties of the Whig and Tory mission. P stands for the patriots whose path never wavered from their vision. Q stands for a quest for the rights we valued and pursued with persistence. R stands for our rebellion in which we faced such strong resistance.
Nice job.
S stands for spies who gathered our secrets that to the British were sent. T stands for traitors like Benedict Arnold and others with such evil intent. U stands for United States of America, our new nation bound together for the strength we will need. V stands for voices of those like Jefferson, Adams, and Paine, who with great wisdom did lead.
Thank you. Good job.
W stands for Washington, our steadfast general on who we could always depend. X stands for the exploits of our colonial men and women who kept their efforts right to the end. Y stands for the yearning for freedom and democracy, which was a bold ambition. Z stands for zero, the number of kings and tyrants that will ever be a part of our American tradition.
Nice job. Nice with that. Okay. Now, Henry, Mary, Lars, and Cassidy, please stand and recite a poem for us. Not the poem. Say the title.
How Mother Saved the Bacon. In September 1781, Captain Landfair was at sea with his crew, protecting their home from the British. Jean Landfair knew she must do. She and her 4 children hid their food and livestock all through the night. The heavy tasks they did quickly in the moonlight.
Very nice.
The butter, wheat, rye, and the animals they cleverly did hide. The hogs were butchered, and the pork in the chimney was tied.
And Cassidy.
When in Dutch cap, British ship landed. The soldiers searched the house, left empty-handed.
Yes. Finish up.
Because Phoebe refused to abandon her home and stood strong and brave, the British captain decided that the Landfair's house he would save.
What a nice job. Very fine. Very fine. Now, our founding fathers were very wise, and they knew the importance of education to a free people. Let's hear the lessons that they have for us. The quotes. Okay.
Knowledge will forever govern ignorance, and a people who mean to be their own governors must arm themselves with the power which knowledge gains. James Madison.
A Bible and newspaper in every house, a good school in every district, all studied and appreciated as they merit are the principal support of virtue, morality, and civil liberty. Benjamin Franklin.
The diffusion of knowledge is the only guardian of true liberty. James Madison.
It is universally admitted that people alone can be permanently a free people. James Madison.
I conceive that a knowledge of books is the basis on which all other knowledge rests. George Washington. Give about 2 hours every day to exercise, for health must not be sacrificed to learning. A strong body makes the mind strong. Thomas Jefferson. Let us dare to read, speak, think, and write. John Adams. Knowledge is power. Knowledge is safety. Knowledge is happiness. Thomas Jefferson. I cannot live without books. Thomas Jefferson.
I will pick up the palm okay, it's okay. It's gone.
Madam State Regent, thank you so much for inviting us to CTDAR's fall meeting. We've had a wonderful time being here. Spices were very important in colonial America. Cinnamon was especially valued. It helped to preserve food and it flavored baked goods, other dishes, and food that was not very fresh.
We made a cinnamon pomander heart for everyone. These are non-edible. Hang them in your kitchen and enjoy their wonderful fragrance. Thank you.
Well, what a wonderful job, children. Please make your manners. And we will be on our way. Thank you.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.